everyone. Welcome to our first ACYPI Brisbane Chapter online events on the topic Imposter Syndrome. We're very excited to have the kickstart for 2022 for Brisbane Chapter and having the lovely people join us and our warmly welcome the guest speakers to join us to share their unique insight on that topic. So I'm going to introduce ACYPR to you guys in case you have not attended any of our previous events before. I'm sorry, I'm gonna turn that. Great, cool. So ACYPI is 100% volunteer-led organization, and we are independent, apolitical, and focus on connecting young professionals and entrepreneurs to the opportunities in the Australia and China relationship. So as you can see from the map, we have 9 chapters in total. There is a typo over there. We have 5 city chapters across Australia: Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, and Perth. And we have 4 city chapters across mainland China. And they are in Beijing, Chengdu, Shanghai, and Guangzhou. We have more than 3,000 members so far. So our vision is to be the leading platform connecting young professionals and entrepreneurs to the opportunities encompassing Australia and China. So we have 3 strategic pillars: engage, connect, and empower. To engage members on different topics which are relevant to Australian and Chinese young professionals, and connect our members to the like-minded peers, empower our members to become the future leaders between Australia and China. So we organize different types of events by different form, and then webinar online is one of the popular ones since post-COVID era. And then we have professional and industry networking events, normally with a topic with the focus. And we also organize social events. Sometimes it's a celebration of a festival or Australian festival or traditional Chinese festival, or it's a cocktail event and a financial events, or the end of the year Christmas celebration. So here are some of examples of the events we organized before, but there's certainly more than that. So we organized a integrating climate into investment strategy by online. And we had a Lunar Chinese New Year cocktail function. We have the speed networking events in Adelaide. And we have the hike for Chinese New Year. I believe that was a Sydney event. So if you're interested, feel free to go on our website to view the events that we organized before. And feel free to give us any feedbacks. So here is a brief introduction of our partner organizations. And that include Australian China Youth Association, Australian China Business Council, Asia Link, and Australian China Youth Dialogue. Our current structure, including a national committee, which consists of our chair, Lucy, our secretary, Emily, and our treasurer, Kalani. These are the people who are sitting on a national committee overseeing all chapters operating. And we have different functional managers to help us to assist our events and organizing materials. And as Maddie, you see at the start of the event, Maddie is our national marketing and communication managers. And I think I saw Judy Gao join our events as well. Judy is our Australian chapter engagement manager. Ifan is our China chapter engagement manager. And with our Eric assisting us on all the technical matters, who is our national IT manager. So I'm the head of Brisbane chapter. There are head or co-heads through different other chapters as well. And under each chapter, we have chapter committee members. A brief introduction of our current Brisbane chapter committee with myself as the head, and Nash, Bing Ray, June, I think he will be joining us a bit later because of work duties, Sonia, and Roger. Now, time to kick start on this topic, imposter syndrome. From our research, up to 82% of professionals across industries have experienced imposter syndrome in their careers. This psychological terminology might sound quite unfamiliar to some of us, but I'm sure that you're familiar with some of the scenarios like, am I fit for this job? Am I capable to get a promotion? Or doubting if you're qualified for a position, comparing with your peers, or feeling anxious about a completely new environment, or even second guessing if you are confident enough when you receive other people's comments. These imposter-like thinkings are really common. This disproportionately affects higher achieving people who find it very difficult to accept their accomplishment or to believe in their capabilities. It is a universal feeling of discomfort, second guessing, and mild anxiety in the workplace and in people's life. So even though we might think that this kind of syndrome more exposed to, women are more exposed to it, but men suffer from it too, which in a much hidden way that we are not aware of. If it's not been treated well, I think it will have a negative impact on our work and our life. So I think in the post-COVID era, looking after mental health will be ranked up to the top 1 or top 2 priority for people's life. So a bit of the agenda of tonight. So Cheryl will be our first speaker to present her story, and Tony will come second with Dr. Lili Mi as our third speaker. And after that, we will have plenty of time for panel discussion and Q&A. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to post it on the chats so that we can see. And then you're probably aware that when you register for this event, we also ask you if you have any questions for our speaker, which we have already noted down for every single question and share with our speakers. So if any of those questions will not be having time for the speakers to address on their presentation, feel free to ask again and post your question on the chat box. So let's introduce our first speaker for tonight, Cheryl Gray. Cheryl is the CEO of Women's Network Australia. Her mission is to empower women in business. As the current CEO of Australia's longest running network group for women in business, she has the honor of celebrating and supporting the success of thousands of small business owners. If you have any further questions or if you love to, feel free to reach out to Cheryl on LinkedIn, and you'll be able to see all the amazing posts for her work with Women's Network Australia in supporting women in business. So without further ado, let us welcome Cheryl.
Thank you, V. What a great, I think, overview of our topic tonight. So that's really amazing. I feel like you've just stolen half my thunder there, but you know, I'll see how I go. I'm going to share my screen as I do have a presentation. So feel free to follow along. The presentation itself is more of a visual presentation than a particularly wordy one. So I will be talking to the slides, and hopefully you'll be able to at least get a little bit of a chuckle from the illustrations. I have to give thanks to the illustrator whose work I have featured in my presentation tonight. Her name is Gemma Correll, and she's a female artist, illustrator, cartoonist, and a self-confessed imposter syndromer. And so she's actually done quite a lot of fairly humorous cartoons and illustrations around the topic of imposter syndrome and mental health and anxiety in particular. So I thought it was apt to share her cartoons with you tonight. It's really interesting doing these presentations in a virtual platform. And so as her cartoon says, may your Wi-Fi signal be strong, may your snacks be plentiful, and may coffee never burn your tongue. I don't think that was Confucius, but hopefully it's enough wisdom to get us through the presentation tonight. I wanted to start by thanking ACYPI for the invitation. It's really great to be able to talk to young people in particular about this topic, because I think you will experience at some point, as certainly most people will, the sense of, quote, imposter syndrome at some stage, and indeed you may already have in your life. So thank you for exploring this topic, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion that will follow and the speakers that will follow. I visited China in October and November of 2018, pre-COVID, and I would have to say it was a highlight of my life. It was the place on this that I want to travel. So I was fortunate enough to travel with an all-female trade delegation from Australia to Beijing and Shenzhen. And what was really special about that trip was we got to see parts of life in China that we perhaps wouldn't normally get to see, perhaps because we were women and we had a little bit more freedom, I'm not sure. But we visited a kindergarten in Beijing and got to spend some time with some very young children. We visited and actually had lunch with university students at one of the universities and had a talk to them about what their life was like, what their future plans were like, and that was a really great opportunity to understand. And what struck me about that was the amount of time that the students spend away from home, which is something very different to probably most families here in Australia. I have two teenage boys, one who's just finishing year 12 and contemplating his start to university, and I can't imagine that he would have left our family at sort of primary school age and headed off and perhaps not been seen for a very long time. So that struck me as something very interesting about the young people that we met. And then we also had the opportunity to visit an aged people's home in Shenzhen, which was also unique in the sense that it was very community orientated, that the level of care to the patients or the people living there was incredibly high. And in fact, that's a big issue out here in Australia. So I really enjoyed my time in China, and I actually hope that more Australians have the opportunity to travel to China and get a better understanding of the way things work and some of the priorities in China, so that we can be a little bit more open-minded and understanding. I wanted to share obviously a little bit about Women's Network Australia. As you heard in the introduction, it is a membership group for women in business. It has been around for over 30 years, and we have women from everything from startups through to ASX listed companies, lots of small business owners owned by women. So the presentation I'm going to give you tonight, I'd like to point out I'm not a psychologist, and so I don't approach this topic from a psychological or a psychology point of view, or a medical point of view. So please take what I say from the perspective of someone who's perhaps got some lived experience of imposter syndrome, but also draws on the experience of particularly lots of women in business and small business in particular. Again, I just wanted to, point out Gemma's amazing little caricatures that I hope you'll appreciate throughout this session. So if we move on to what is imposter syndrome, and as I said, I think Vi gave a really great introduction. Imposter syndrome, from what I've read, dates back to sort of the late 70s, when it was actually termed imposter phenomenon really than a syndrome as such. And it was identified out of a study which focused on high achieving women. So perhaps that's why we tend to associate imposter syndrome with women in particular, because the idea or the concept of it really stemmed out of that area of study. But it's obviously not something that is limited to women. There are obviously plenty of examples, and I'm sure you've heard some, famous examples, but particularly women seem to stand out. The likes of Michelle Obama is someone who has at several times in her life confessed to experiencing that sense of imposter syndrome. It's something that seems to be about, in terms of a definition, doubting your own abilities and feeling like a fraud. And I think it's important that we distinguish between this sense of imposter syndrome, this feeling like a fraud, as opposed to self-doubt, because I think we all at times experience self-doubt. There are those of us who at times perhaps experience a high level of self-doubt, and it really gets almost into that self-sabotaging kind of behaviour, where there is a true belief and an anxiety that you're not worthy, and that can have some fairly significant physical effects, as well as in terms of your mental well-being. Just in relation to those impacts, obviously things like, anxiety and stress, both in the short term and the long term, aren't good for us. It is a fairly heavy load to bear, not just the sense of self-doubt and fear and this desire to be perfect, but as I mentioned, there's this higher level of imposter syndrome, where there is a real feeling that you are undeserved, unloved, and will be found out. So the sort of sense of almost like a criminal fraudulence, that may not be true in reality, but it is a feeling that some people obviously get when they get to that level of I guess so-called suffering, and I think there has been a number of articles written about whether there's any benefit in us labeling things like imposter syndrome, or whether in fact it can be more harmful. I probably fall on the sense of being aware of things is a good thing. Having the opportunity to talk about it and discuss it and understand it is a good thing. But I do think we do have to be at times careful of labels. Sometimes labels can be used as both an excuse for taking responsibility and accountability, but also sometimes trivialize what can be a very complex situation for many individuals. I think the thing about imposter syndrome is, yes, it certainly plays out in our professional lives, and that can be from school to university to work, but it also is part of our private lives as well. Many of us have experienced situations, and perhaps you have too, where you're in a relationship and you feel perhaps you're not good enough, you're not worthy. At some point, it's going to come to an end. They're going to discover the real you, that you're not good enough. They're the types of personal impacts that can be triggered by this sort of sense of self-doubt and imposter syndrome. So it has a flow-on effect in terms of our personal lives and our relationships, not just our professional working lives. But when we think about what impact it can have at work, for example, it can result in people either missing out on promotions or even turning them down because they didn't feel that they were worthy, not putting their best foot forward in a job interview because they didn't think they were the best candidate or that they weren't qualified for the job. One of the things that we find with women in business is there is a higher failure rate of women who start up businesses when we look at women compared to men. And some recent studies have sort of started to investigate some of those reasons why. And there's a number of reasons why. One is that women starting businesses don't get the same level of access to capital as men. So consequently, they're behind the 8 ball in terms of the starting position. But the other factor for many women is they feel they're not qualified enough. They start their business and then they invest a lot of time in training and personal development because they feel that they have to be better, they have to be perfect. We've seen some examples of women, for example, who are working on their website for 4 years because it's not good enough, it's not perfect, it hasn't got everything they want in it. And so what happens in that time is they're not selling their product. So they become not only paralyzed by this sense of perfection, but it actually then has a real impact on their bottom line and on their revenue. So, being able to deal with, to understand how things like perfectionism, self-doubt and imposter syndrome actually play out in a business sense is really important for our members to understand. And that's why we like to be able to talk about topics like this. What are the signs? Some of the signs really relate to behavioural signs, like, as I said, that sense of perfectionism. I can't move forward until it's absolutely perfect. Also things like attributing your success to external factors like, oh, I was just lucky, or I was in the right place, or I couldn't have done it without, the other candidates or my team members doing it. That sense of self-doubt that you don't really believe you're good enough, or that you're not capable enough, you're not qualified enough. Those are things that certainly seem to be some of the triggers for imposter syndrome. The other thing is setting really challenging goals that may actually be impossible to achieve, and then feeling disproportionately disappointed when you actually fail. And so if you stepped back for that and said, well, the goal was probably unrealistic in the first place, so why be disappointed that it couldn't be achieved? So there's this real this real sense of overachievement that tends to be equated with some of the symptoms of, or signs of, imposter syndrome. So some of the questions in the writings about imposter syndrome that ask the questions, do you agonize over even the smallest mistakes and flaws in your work? The sense of perfectionism that comes through. Do you attribute your success to luck or outside factors? Are you very sensitive to even constructive criticism? Do you take that hard and do you dwell on that criticism? Do you feel like you will inevitably be found out as a phony? And that is that sense of, I'm a fraud, I'm not good enough. And it's not even that sense of that people will judge me. It's that real anxiety around being, quote, found out. And also, do you downplay your skills and expertise in areas where others know you to be skilled and aware? So the stat I think you used at the introduction, V, was in relation to around about 80%. So between 70 and 80% of people experience imposter syndrome at some stage in their life. And the question is, what do we do about it? How can we get control of it? And indeed, how can we use it to our advantage? So that's some of the important challenges that we need to face. Part of it is this sense of the inner voice. This why are we telling ourselves that we're not good enough? You know, one of the things that I think people perhaps where and to tell someone who is having issues with self-confidence to just it's kind of like, well, to first. Sorry,
Hello,
I dropped out there. Hello, can you hear me? Sorry,
Hi.
I just.
Yes, we can hear you.
You're back, Cheryl.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Sorry, everyone. Sorry, I've just lost my place here. So yeah, we have this sort of inner voice that tells us that perhaps we're not good enough. How do we get control of that? There's some obviously there's some longer term things, some things that we need perhaps some professional guidance and assistance on, but there are some quick fixes that we can all potentially draw on, and one of those is simply.
Hi, Cheryl. Do you mind just sharing your screen?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
We like the drawing, Cheryl.
Are we back?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, some of the quick fixes that we can use are things like literally just sharing your feelings, just talking to someone, a friend, a family member, and you're not necessarily asking for help, but just to simply share how you're feeling, because it's often good for us to know that there are others out there who feel the same. And as those stats would indicate, most of us have had these feelings at some point, and it's okay, but it makes us feel better. And I think people have comfort to know that there are others out there who feel a bit the same. Some of the other quick fixes that I've heard people use are things like just writing a list of your achievements and revisiting those, just to remind yourself the good things that you have done, the mountains you've climbed, the hurdles you've jumped, because often we move on to the next thing or the next challenge, but we don't take time to celebrate and just consider, wow, I did that, I was able to do that. So keeping a list and just revisiting those challenges, it could be photographs or examples of your work, for example. The other thing is some people keep a little file or an inbox, a box in their emails to put praise when someone says you've done a good job, or thanks for that, or I really love what you've done. Put it in there and keep those messages so that you can reread them to just remind yourself that you are worthy, that you are good enough, and people do acknowledge that credibility that you have. The other one is I never say to people, get it, but also I think in the world that we're in, that's an impossible ask. However, I think it is important to monitor the impact of social media on your feelings. If you spend time on social media and you don't feel good at the end of it, question why that might be. Is it that you're looking at things that are really unrealistic, or that are challenging your own thoughts and feelings about yourself? And if it is, maybe turn it off and have a break. I mentioned briefly that sometimes imposter syndrome is not all bad. Whoops, I'm just confusing you with my drawings now. We're going full cartoon technique. can we actually use it to our advantage? And I think sometimes we can. I mean, I think some of the benefits of not so much imposter syndrome, but a little bit of self-doubt can actually be quite a motivator, a personal motivator. If you feel like you're not enough, naturally you will try harder, you will go the extra mile. So certainly in some cases those feelings can be to your advantage. And I think one of the things we talk about in our membership is this sense of being a humble leader, a leader who's not boastful or arrogant, but someone who acknowledges that they are part of a team and that they've done things not on their own, but with the help and cooperation of others. The elements of imposter syndrome can actually be helpful. But ultimately, a really useful thing is to just change the language a bit. Try to move from I can't to I can. Try to move from I'm not to I am is a bit of a catchphrase. That's all good and well, but when you're feeling low, you might just need to go with the flow and just accept that sometimes we don't feel good about ourselves. That's okay too. But use those quick fix techniques that I talked about that can potentially help you to just remember that that you are worthy and that you are capable. The other thing you've probably heard a lot is, yes, remembering you're not alone, but also remembering to accept praise and learning how to do that, rather than saying, Tony, I love that scarf, to say, thanks, I love your scarf too, Cheryl, except I'm not wearing one. So
you had to go there, Cheryl, you had to go there.
Fortunately, I know Tony well enough to have a little joke with him. So, learning to accept praise and learning to accept that people do acknowledge your achievements and value those is another important factor. One of the questions that I think one of our guests asked was, should we just fake it till we make it? And I'm not a fan of the fake it till you make it philosophy, partly because it implies that you're not really capable, that you're not really qualified, and that you're basically doing something on a false premise. In saying that, though, the example I gave earlier about, businesses that are operated by men have a higher success rate is often because while the women-owned businesses are out doing more personal development and training, the guys are out getting the customers and figuring out how they're going to service them later. So, in some cases, yes, faking it until you're making it does actually work at least sometimes in a commercial sense. But I think the better approach is really being clear about your reason for being in business or being in a particular job or profession. What is the problem that you're trying to solve in your profession, and how are you solving that problem? If you're clear about those things, then I don't really feel that you have to fake it. It's there, it's evident for you, and it should come through. Couple of final things before I finish off my presentation. What else can we do? I mentioned social media. We often have some other potential toxic influences in our lives. It can be friends and family who maybe speak to us in a certain way or have certain expectations. So, sometimes we have to do as the Andrew Sisters song from the 70s goes, the negatives from our lives, and some tips that others use to do that is have some favorite songs that uplift you and make you feel joyful and happy. They can not only shift your mood but help eliminate that feeling of imposter syndrome. As I said, use those emails and examples of good work that you've done previously, and things like being aware that sometimes, using your self-awareness around imposter syndrome or confidence actually be used as a superpower, and use that feeling to drive you forward. key one I wanted to finish on, obviously, was asking for help. And that can be from friends, as I said, just having a discussion and sharing your feelings. Or if you feel that you need, you know, more professional help and are held back and anxious about, you know, by imposter syndrome, then I really would encourage you to seek some professional help. So with the help of the pug from Gemma Correll, I will probably finish up there. If you want to see more of Gemma's work, which I really love, please have a look at her on Instagram. She certainly won't make you feel like an imposter. And if you want to hear more from me, you can email me at Cheryl at Women's Network Australia, or look up Women's Network Australia on the internet.
All right, thank you very much, Cheryl, for sharing your insight into this topic and some of your stories to help people to recognize this, and when it's needed, where and how we could seek for help, either in the help from ourselves or the help from the external resources like our friends or professional helps. I believe that there are some questions that people would like to ask, but let's us continue with our speakers and wrap up all of the questions at the Q&A in the end. So don't worry, we're still having time for your questions. So now I'm gonna share my screen. A brief introduction for our second speaker, Tony. Tony is the founder and CEO of the Bulmer Group, and he is the presentation and business coach. So I believe everyone, when register events, read through Tony's bio, and some of Tony's big clients could include Wolf, Tel, Milliant, Toyota, and NAB, and Deloitte as well. So sorry. Without further ado, let us welcome Tony.
Thank you, V, and good evening to all of you. Thank you, Cheryl, for sharing great experience and great knowledge. And congratulations to everyone. And I say this very sincerely because I really take my hat off to you for being interested in this topic, because I think it's a very real issue in our community, and I think we all need to be aware of it and know how to deal with it. You might be wondering, though, what does a 60-year-old white Anglo-Saxon male, and you won't necessarily know this, but I can add to this, that grew up in a reasonably privileged environment in Sydney. We weren't particularly wealthy, but we were comfortable, and I went to a private school here in Sydney. So you may well ask yourself, well, what does this person know at all about imposter syndrome? And I want to say to you right off the bat that I do know a bit about it, because I've absolutely experienced it firsthand myself, and I want to share that story for you. So my background is that I grew up here in Sydney, and I wasn't particularly academic at school. I was too busy chasing girls and playing sport, and according to Cheryl, I obviously set my expectations were too high, so I failed miserably on the girls front. But so I didn't do well at school. I did miserably well academically. So I went into the workforce. I was very motivated from a career point of view, and I found myself in advertising. I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, but I spent 8 years in advertising, and I did okay, but it wasn't what I wanted to do long term. By chance, more than anything else, at 25 years of age, I found myself as the first employee of a coaching business here in Australia. It was an arm of an American company that already existed, and I joined the person who bought the rights to Australia. My job was to sell and deliver presentation skills coaching. My network of friends was such that it took me very much into the world of professional firms, and I found myself working 25, 26 years of age with Macquarie Bank, with Citigroup, with BT, or the old Bankers Trust as it was in those days, Morgan Stanley and other financial institutions, not just financial institutions, but very heavily involved in those businesses. We were doing an enormous amount of work with Citigroup. Citi, we work with today, we work with them across India and Asia Pac. At 26, apart from coaching a lot of the people in the business here in Australia for Citi, I was actually intimately involved coaching the joint managing directors of Citi. They had a joint MD structure, a guy by the name of John Tom and a guy by the name of Mike Cannon-Brookes. And Mike Cannon-Brookes is the father of Mike Cannon-Brookes, the tech billionaire. These men were in their late 40s, they were early 50s, thereabouts. They were big men. And I was actually helping them on specific presentations they were making to clients, to senior management offshore. And I would sit in the car park of number 1 Margaret Street, where they were in those days, before going up to the 40th floor and thinking, this is nuts. This is absolutely crazy. I'm 26 years of age. I have no tertiary qualifications. I have very little experience, and I don't have the intellect to match these guys at all. This is just nuts. And I actually remember turning 30 and thinking that maybe I was becoming credible, at least from an age perspective. And I had a very close relationship with these guys, and I actually shared this with them when I sort of turned 30 or thereabouts. And I remember John Tom, who was quite a cheeky man. He said to me, Tony, we knew you had a problem with your age, but you were the only one that did. And then he cheekily added, and he said, by the way, we weren't asking you how to run a bank, which I thought, I can't believe that. I don't know why you wouldn't be asking me how to run a bank. Now, that conversation was really important to me because it didn't change me overnight, but it created the foundation for me moving forward to realize that the issue was in my head rather than anyone else's head. So I say that to you to just say, I get it, right? I get it. It's a challenge for most people, and I'm going to come back to that. So today what I'd like to do is share 2 things. I'd like to share some observations in relation to what I think the characteristics or behaviours or some of the issues that occur with imposter syndrome behaviour. And as Cheryl's alluded to, there are degrees of, with confidence, you know, feeling less entitled than others, etc. And I also then want to share some thoughts and solutions around how we can be better, and particularly from a communication point of view, because what I find generally is that people who do have tendencies in this regard tend to be less vocal in the workplace, particularly, and I'm coming at it from a workplace point of view. They tend to be less inclined to speak up at the boardroom table. They tend to be less inclined to put their hand up for presentations, etc., or at least feel comfortable doing it. So I want to put some tips to you around how to be successful from a communication point of view. So observations, and unlike Cheryl, I'm not using slides. I'm too. I don't know any good illustrators, Cheryl. So I need to find out yours. I just want to pick up on Cheryl's comment. I mean, it's already been said. It's definitely not unique to women, but I would say, and I'm an example of that, and I'll give you another example in a moment. But I would say, in my experience, it's more pronounced with women, and I'm not thrilled in saying this, but men have done a terrific job at making women feel, you know, less capable at times in the workplace. So, you know, that's not a great thing, but it's the truth. So it is often more pronounced with women, but it's not unique. And I think we need to be aware of that. It can be related to age, technical qualifications, experience, cultural background, social upbringing, social and economic backgrounds, gender, and any other point of difference. So there's a whole range of influences that perhaps contribute to people feeling less capable, less qualified, and less entitled, if you like, to be in a particular environment. So what I'm therefore saying is it's common in my experience, and I don't like saying this, but arguably it's normal. It is almost a normality about it in this day and age. Now, that then gets into a complicated conversation around, well, what are we doing in terms of the way we're bringing up kids and students and educating them? And I'm not qualified to have that discussion, but it's pretty prevalent. One of the questions that came through from some of you, was the whole issue of recognizing it, and should it be easy to recognize? I think we should be able to recognize it in ourselves. I mean, did I use the words imposter syndrome when I was working with the MDs of Citigroup? No, I didn't use those words. They weren't in my head, but I knew I was highly uncomfortable, and I actually felt like I was going to get caught out. Right? So I was aware of it myself. So I think if we're honest with ourselves, we can. The question then becomes, but what to do about it? If the question is it easy to recognize in others? That's a really interesting question, because On one hand, I think it should be, but I think the truth is it's not necessarily. And I'll give you an example. I've just run a workshop, a couple of months ago. I ran a workshop for a client, a financial services institution, an investment management firm, a mid-sized firm, terrifically successful. And I was working with the tax and audit team. And there was a guy in the workshop, a 28-year-old guy, who I liked, but I just felt I wasn't getting all of him in the workshop. He just wasn't contributing as much as he could. He wasn't defensive of feedback at all. And every now and then, across the 2 days, I would just see snippets of his personality that made me think, gosh, there's more to this guy than I'm seeing on the whole. I was talking to his boss at the end of the workshop, and I know her well. She's a terrific manager and leader of people. This guy hadn't been there that long, but she was already forming the view that she didn't think he was right for the business. She was starting to question whether he was right for the business. She was questioning his motivations. She was questioning his appetite for ambition. She wasn't questioning his confidence. And I said to her, I said, I think there's something else. There's something else here. I don't know what it is. I don't know what's driving it, but I think there's something else. And I asked her permission to talk to him offline because I felt that he trusted me. So we went and had a sandwich, the guy and I, a week later, and he was thrilled to talk to me, and which goes to Cheryl's point about people are often quite keen just to share. And I was direct with him. I said, come on, there's something going on. We're not getting the best of you. And it was all about imposter syndrome. This is a guy who's academically qualified, 28-year-old guy, lovely guy, has come from, my mother, dreadful expression, would say he came from the wrong side of the tracks. He hasn't come from a wealthy or a strong economic background. He's come from a very, very sort of poor background. He went to a public school. Nothing wrong with public schools. Please don't misinterpret my commentary here, but I'm just sharing the facts with you. As part of that, he's got a Lebanese background. You wouldn't know it in any way, shape or form. Not that would matter anyway. And as part of his sort of family background, he's a huge rugby league fan. Now, I'm going back millions of years in saying this in a very simplistic way, but his mindset was rugby league is much more blue collar worker and rugby union is much more white collar worker and the sort of people you're going to meet in a professional services firm. None of which is true, in my opinion, these days. In fact, half the people talk about footy tipping on Monday morning, they're talking about, rugby league teams. And the culture of the workplace that he's in is a delightful culture. There is no snobbery, there is no class stuff at play. And he said that completely. All of this was being imposed on him by himself. But my real point in this story is that his manager, who I think is terrific, right? So I'm not being nasty about her, but it wasn't her first thought to think maybe what was the cause of his performance was actually a confidence issue. And I went back to her and I said, this guy's going to take on the world. He can take on the world if you can unlock his confidence. So now there's a very different strategy in play in managing him. So I guess my point is it easy to recognize you've got to go looking for it? You've got to be sensitive to the possibility that people can look terrifically well dressed. They can seemingly be quite outgoing on the surface, some of them, not all, but some. It's not about introvert, extrovert. It's just, but that doesn't mean that behind the scenes is deep-rooted confidence and self-belief. And I think we should be at least sensitive to wondering whether that's a contributor at times. Cheryl's touched on the impacts. The impacts are huge from a negative point of view. Three simple ways I would describe it. One, people will miss opportunities. There's no question. You will be passed over for jobs and opportunities. Cheryl's comment was interesting about even if you're offered it, you might knock it back. But you're going to get passed over if you don't believe in yourself. Secondly, I think you're unattractive to other people because we all like hanging out with people who bring some level of energy and contribution to discussions. We don't want arrogant people around us, but we want people who are contributing in some form. So people who sit back because of confidence or entitlement or otherwise tend to be less attractive, sadly, wrongly or rightly. And I think the other extraordinary thing is that from a negative impact point of view is it's massively tiring. emotionally, physically, and mentally, if you're walking around in a regular state of self-doubt and feeling like you don't belong in this particular environment, whatever it is, it's exhausting. So it's not good for your health. And of course, that can show itself in extreme ways, as Cheryl alluded to. So is there a solution to all of that? Look, the one thing I would say from a solution point of view, and there's a range of solutions that I think are necessary, and Cheryl's talked about short-term, longer-term, but my own experience is that mentoring is crucial. And this is not a new idea to any of you, but if you haven't got mentors in your world, you need them. But what I would say about mentors is they need to be people who you absolutely believe. And what I mean by that is I had the privilege of having a mentor in my world from about the age of 26, 27, because I left that employer where I was and went out on my own, which is a long story in itself I won't bore you with. And that's the business that still exists today. But I had a mentor for many years, and he was brutally honest in terms of his constructive feedback, right? In terms of telling me my gaps in my armory. But what that meant was when he was telling me about what my strengths were, I actually knew he was being honest. I always believed him. And I think it's great to have constructive feedback, but we've got to be able to take and receive positive feedback. And my own experience is high performers are the worst at that, because they're always looking for, how can I get better? How can I get better? They're not good at hearing the love. But it's got to be real love. It's got to be genuine love. So what am I saying in terms of all of my observations? Look, really the point is, I think this condition, if you want to call it that, is real. Sadly, I think there's a degree of normality, and I think it needs a team approach. If you look at individual sports people, tennis players, golfers, racing car drivers, when they win tournaments and what have you, you hear them in their thanks. They always thank the team. There's a team behind people, and we all need a team behind ourselves in some form or other. So the question then is, well, how can we manage this? And particularly, I'm coming from a communication perspective. That's my bias that I bring to the table. So I'm going to share 6 thoughts, 3 of which are more mindset issues, and 3 of which are very tactical behaviors that you might find helpful. So at a mindset level, the first thing is we all need to understand that our full value in the workplace can only be maximized if we can combine technical expertise and communication expertise. Now, obviously I bring a bias to the table in saying this, but it's true. We can't reach our full potential just with technical expertise alone. We can choose to play in that space, but we have to accept that might pull us short of where we could have gotten to. So I think it's important that we face into that, and therefore we're motivated towards embracing the communication challenge, even though it might be confronting. The second thing from a mindset point of view is to not put pressure on ourselves that others aren't putting on us. I'll give an example of what I mean by that. It's a very common scenario that I encounter where someone will say to me, Tony, I've just been asked to present to the board on Monday. They want me to do a project update on the project that I'm working on. And of course, we're midstream, we haven't finished it. There's so much more work to do. And I'm at wit's end. I'm worried about, what if they ask me a question I don't know the answer to? What if they ask a question that we haven't as yet had the chance to do the analysis on? And it's like, hang on a second. The board know all that. They know you haven't completed the project. They may well ask a question that you haven't as yet covered in your analysis, but they don't know that. You can legitimately say, look, we haven't got to that as yet, where we need to do a lot more work in that space. So my point is simply, don't put pressure on yourself and expectations on yourself that others actually aren't putting on you. Am I saying it's easy peasy presenting to the board? Of course not, but let's keep it in perspective. Third mindset issue is to take yourself seriously. Now that might sound a bit odd. That has connotations of perhaps, being pretty keen and being a scarf wearing man. Cheryl's, having a go at me about my scarf, but you do have to take yourself seriously. You have to believe that you can add value. I coach some extraordinary people. I coach people that are running businesses, global businesses, Australian businesses, complex businesses. I don't remotely have those skills and expertise. But in terms of having a conversation with them about communication issues and their communication impact or how to best coach their people, I'm wonderfully qualified to have that conversation. If this is a bit of tough love, but if we don't take ourselves seriously and believe that we can add value to the conversation, we have no right to expect anyone else to take it seriously. That's the truth. Animal kingdom, fantastic at smelling fear, right? We're part of the animal kingdom. People smell our lack of confidence if that's what we convey. So 3 behaviors I want you to think about. People who, in my experience, perhaps suffer from imposter syndrome or a lack of confidence, entitlement, they're often very polite. They're often driven by being polite because they don't feel entitled to interrupt into conversations. They tend to be a bit more hesitant, but politeness is important to them. Be polite. Here's a simple tip. Ask permission. If you're sitting in a meeting or around a boardroom table, ask permission to offer an opinion. If you're new in a team or you're new in a role or you're new in a business, say, look, may I offer some feedback here, or may I offer a thought here? And you might even go a step further and say, look, I know everyone here has been in this business a lot longer than I have, but if I may just offer an observation, let me tell you something. No one's ever going to say no. They'll never say no. So you've got the floor. You've been satisfied that you've now got the microphone, if you like, and you've said it in the most charming of ways. So a very simple way to get into a conversation is to ask permission. The second behavioral tip is, I could talk for hours about this, rehearse. And I mean this very seriously. And I'm talking about conversations. Forget the word presentation. Conversations, discussions, catch-ups with people, tough conversations. I drive myself nuts spending time in my office, spending time in my car, in the shower, having conversations out loud with people that I'm meeting with that day. Because to be confident in having that conversation, I need to know how it's going to sound and feel. And I talk a lot about muscle memory. People spend time writing and rewriting and editing and typing and, notes and scripts and what have you. It doesn't work. It's actually the wrong set of muscles. The way you write something is completely different to the way you say something verbally. Get in the space of these muscles. So for a lot of conversations, rehearsal is your best friend. My last comment, and I'm conscious of time, my last tip is about not self-critiquing. And I want to tell you one final story. This is very recent. I was coaching a woman as part of a group in a medical business, all smart eggs, just a week ago. And again, a lawyer, she was from a legal role in the business. Mature, when I say mature woman, I don't know, 40, single mum, doing an amazing job, managing family, managing full-time career, chronically lacking confidence as a presenter. Like, she had not slept for days leading up to just the workshop with me, okay? And told us how much it just stressed her completely. And I believe it. I see this stuff a lot. She then stood up and made an amazing presentation. And I thought she was going to, because she's actually quite an out there person. She was incredibly engaging. She was really interesting. She had extraordinary, and her topic was actually pretty dry, right? But she had great stories and examples to illustrate her knowledge and bring it to life. I didn't spend much time observing her. I spent more time observing her colleagues. I was sitting at the back of the room. I was observing her colleagues, her audience, listening to her. They were smiling, they were nodding, they were writing things down. They were so completely engaged. She didn't see any of it. She didn't see any of that. I often talk about watching the ball land. My analogy is tennis. I can hit a ball, occasionally. I can hit it well, very occasionally, and think, well, what a fantastic shot. The ball can be an inch out. More often than not, I can hit it and think, gosh, that was a terrible shot. I didn't move my feet, et cetera, et cetera. Ironically, though, the ball can be an inch in. In other words, what we think of our own shots actually doesn't matter. It's where the ball lands. Did the audience like the ball? Did they agree with the ball? So it's not just as simple as eye contact. I'm talking about being truly audience centric and actually seeing and observing. I mean, I know I've walked into meetings and presentations where I'm undercooked. I'm 70. I did a presentation to I don't know, about 150 people a few weeks ago, and just because of my workload, I felt a bit undercooked with it. I knew I felt that way, and I didn't like that. But I thought, I know my content. I'm just got to engage with these people and see what comes back at me. They loved it, and I'm not being smarty pants in saying that, but I could see that they were with me. So all I'm saying is, don't self-critique. Let your audience tell you. You know, when I say your audience, your people, your colleagues in meetings, discussions, let them tell you how they're responding to your contribution. So what am I saying to you? Look, observations, it's real, it's normal. You need a team. From a mindset point of view and a behavioral point of view, you've got to face into it. I would strongly encourage you to rehearse and plan for discussions that you need to have and want to have. But I would also say, let people tell you whether they find it valuable. That's not your place to judge. I look forward to your questions. Thank you for listening. Thank you, V.
Yeah, should give applause here, Tony. Thank you very much for sharing the stories. And then I do have a question when you mentioned about, sorry, but I really want to ask this. So when you mentioned about people's comments and people's opinions, so this is reflecting to the conversation I had with my friend. How do you tell if people's comments are genuine? How do you tell if they're actually giving you constructive feedback or they just want to give you a mindset blow?
That's a great question, V. I mean, I'm not of the view that everyone will give you really, truly honest feedback. I mean, my ex-wife says of me, or has said of me, that don't ask Tony's opinion unless you want it. And maybe that's why she's my ex-wife. I don't know, but separate issue. We won't go into that. But I actually believe in honesty. And so what that means is I then surround myself with people in terms of my inner sanctum. I only want people in my life that are going to be the same back to me. I want honesty. How do you assess it? Look, it's as much instinct and intuition than anything else. But you know when people are, you know, if they don't give you, for want of a better word, criticism, if you know you made some mistakes and they say, oh no, it was all really good, well, that's not giving really meaningful feedback. So I think when people can give you specific feedback, and you can say, give me 2 things that I did really well, give me 2 things that I did really well there, and give me 2 things that you think I really could have done better. And if they can't answer that, so you're opening the door for them, right? And if they can't then respond to that, then they're not the people you want as mentors and or as sounding boards, in my opinion.
So you're saying the one way to tell the differences between whether it's a genuine comments is if they are only giving you criticism, or if they are giving you the comment as well as suggestions to help you improve.
Well, I'm saying 2 things, V. I think one, the best feedback is always balanced, and I don't mean 2 and 2 or 3 and 3. It might be 2 and 1 or 2 and 3. You know, but there's 2 sides to every bit of feedback. And I think the more authentic, you can tell if people are being authentic or not when they're very specific. So if they can say, look, V, when you actually introduced us this afternoon, you said, you know, so they're very specific with their example, as opposed to, oh yeah, it was really good, V, I really loved it, I was, you know, really terrific. And it's like, that's too general. By the way, I was only kidding, V. I thought you did a great job this afternoon introducing us.
Thank you, Tony. I like your feedback. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you. So we have been receiving the questions from the audience, which we will definitely ask in our Q&A session. And now let us welcome our 3rd speaker, Dr. Sorry, I don't think I'm sharing my screen. Give me a second. Let us welcome our third speaker, Dr. Lili Mi. Lili is a lecturer at Griffith University in the Department of Business Strategy and Innovation. She's also a member of Griffith Asia Institute and a fellow of Higher Education Academy. Lili holds a PhD in Strategic Management and International Business from Massey University, New Zealand. Sorry. So I think I'll let Lili to meet and greet everyone and have a further introduction of herself and share with us about her unique insight into imposter syndrome in academia. Let us welcome Lili.
Thank you so much. Give me a moment. Can you see the full screen?
Yep.
Awesome. All right. So hi, everyone. I'm Lili. I think Sharon and Tony have done an amazing job of introducing what imposter syndrome is, and also some of the amazing examples. I can definitely resonate myself and connect to many of the points. So I might have some of the similar content for my presentation, but hopefully I can bring some new insights from academia, you know, as a academic coming from a social scientist background, you know, what imposter syndrome mean to me and also to other academics, and also what are the coping approaches that might be helpful. So from our audience, I checked actually from our audience poll, I saw some PhD candidates or academics there. So hopefully we have some of you here. If not, probably this presentation will also give you some insights that the so-called experts or scientists also are facing similar, you know, issues. So you are definitely not alone in, you know, dealing and coping with imposter syndrome. All right, so as Vanita introduced that I'm a lecturer from the Department of Business Strategy and Innovation in Griffith University, and also holds a member and a fellowship from different institutions. And I have a PhD in international business and strategic management, and, you know, looking at what are the strategies of multinational enterprises from emerging markets are using. My current projects look at how Chinese multinational enterprises actually responded to COVID, and also are looking at what are the diversification strategies of these firms might be using in the future, including some firms in the US as well. My recent study investigated how our Australian exporters actually coped with COVID. And I have a new report coming out soon. So if anyone is interested in that, you can definitely reach out to me. I will send you a copy of the report. And also sorry for my voice, by the way, because I got COVID a few weeks ago. So if I cough a little bit, please, you know, I will probably mute myself. So sorry for the interruption if that happens. And I'm a supervisor of 3 PhD candidates. And also I'm an early career researcher. That means I'm relatively early in my you know, academic career with a fairly recent PhD you know, degree. I think that put me in the situation in many cases I would doubt and ask myself, am I really good enough, you know, to be in the space where I am now? And especially I have 3 PhD candidates. On average, I think they are 10 years older than me. So with lots of experience. So most of the time I will be questioning myself if I ask them to do this, am I actually directing them to the right to the right direction, or I should actually ask them what they want to do. So I'm actually having this living experience of imposter syndrome. But I have to say that so far, I haven't experienced much of the negative kind of side of this imposter syndrome. So I definitely agree with what Sharon said, that you can definitely turn the weakness to a strength. So knowing that although, we sometimes have some moments of self-doubt, but we can definitely think about how we can cope and how we can actually improve ourselves to turn it around. So this becomes a motivation to become better and better. All right. So in general, imposter syndrome in academia is similar to all the other professions. And is extremely common, in the world of science. And one thing I do want to point out is these conditions normally it's for high achievers. So if for someone who is living a very comfortable, space, like doing the same job every day, don't even need to think about things and can close your eyes and do things, you probably are having a really good life, never experience imposter syndrome, but that also means you are not climbing probably the career ladder, right? So if you do feel some of these imposter tendencies or moments, that actually is not a bad thing. At least you are aiming high, right? And also many of the faculties do question their own professional identity and also competency within their career. And the majority of them are early career academics like me, and women and minority faculties, because of they sometimes receive some biases, and also they are less represented in their work. And quite ironically, top faculty talent are most at risk of experiencing imposter tendencies. And I remember when I was doing my PhD, I was talking to the Dean Research once, and she told me that sometimes she fears that one day the university will find out she is a silly girl from the countryside. So I'm like, wow, how can a university dean have this kind of doubts of herself as well? And she shares her experiences of being a women leader and sometimes having this, less confident moments. But despite that, I can see lots of achievements from her, and also her mentoring approach of many young scholars. So we should understand, not only the early career, staff members, women, but also the top faculty talent and people at the top may also experience imposter syndrome. And there are three kind of signs that if we do experience this, we can actually identify this and be a bit more mindful that we might be having some of these imposter syndrome moments, and then try to think about some approaches to cope it, so we can actually link it to a better developmental approach, rather than having this one to have some negative negative impacts on us. So this include inability to internalize success. So that means having this self-doubt and anxiety to when we, for example, receive award. Actually, a few years ago, I attended the biggest international business conference, and it's my first time to attend the conference. And out of surprise, I received a nomination for the Best Paper Award. When I received it, I thought it's a mistake. Because when I went to a conference, I noticed 4 papers got nomination, and the other 3 are all from the top scholars in the world. And I was standing beside them, I was so scared that they will find out my paper is not so good, and why they selected me, to receive the award. And also experience of fraudulent feelings of, thinking that someone, someday we may lose all the credibility, and also having really high standard about our work, right? Questioning the status we have, and also constantly looking at the work we do and thinking about how we can become better, because there's really no limit sometimes in terms of being perfectionist, right? Because you can always become better, especially in this hyper-competitive scholarly community. And what are the complex, impacts that imposter syndrome can bring to academics? It could be, in general, lower job performance, or it can lead to, teaching as well, and also student evaluations. Some faculty might experience anxiety. I know some of them. I think we all have strengths and weakness, right? But people tend to overemphasize our weakness, but not seeing our strengths. So I have colleagues who are amazing teachers, but she or he might not be doing as good in research as they're teaching. So they will worry that someday they will be caught that not having enough publications, and because that's part of the criteria of how we will be evaluated in our career, and also having this negative impact on our identity development as a researcher, and of course strive for a higher kind of leader position in the career as well. But I want to also share the two causes of imposter syndrome in academia, and also probably you can resonate in your own profession as well, is job demanding job requirements. And I think especially after COVID, I'm not sure if other industries, but in tertiary education, it becomes more demanding and more competition, because we have large of many faculty members lost their jobs. So there are some small number of positions available in the market, but hundreds of people are competing for the same job. And some of my peers who graduated a couple of years ago are still, looking for a job. So it becomes more demanding, for young scholars to enter the job market and also do well. And also in terms of publications, and we have seen an increased level of negative feedback and lots of scrutiny as well from a variety of audience, especially the reviewers. So having a bit of understanding of imposter syndrome, my story actually is about when I started my PhD. I have a great passion for international business. It links to imposter syndrome, because when I started, I thought, wow, it could be possible my PhD can change the world. I can actually find out what the problems of multinational enterprises are facing, and I can make a great deal in their decision-making process, and also help them to make better decisions, may solve a lot of problems in the world. But at the end, I find out I didn't even tackle any of the big problems on my list at the end of my PhD. And that's why I started to think about, is my PhD qualified me as a scientist in terms of trying to solve all of these big, problems. But I have to say that sometimes we set a goal that's too high to achieve, after several years of reflection, now I can set some realistic goals that I can achieve within a short time period, but also link it to a bigger goals that I aim at, 5 to 10 years later. And also, this is a little bit of specific to academics. In the job market, and especially in the tenure process, we have this kind of publish or perish tendency that make people feel like if we are not the best of ourselves, it might be the end of our career. And that's why we always have this self-doubt and then think about we have to actually hold the standard, hold the bar high in order to keep our career. And also there's a tendency of, higher level of criticism from reviewers, as I mentioned before, that leads to more self-doubt regarding the quality of the work from academics. And lots of, feelings and thoughts about, is my research any use of beyond the narrow academic circles, and also are my students learning anything from my classes, and are some of the moments that will come into surface in my mind. But as a researcher, I did some research, so I really appreciated this opportunity actually for me to reflect on these imposter syndrome moments that sometimes come to my mind, and also looking into what others have said and what scholars have done in terms of research after interviewing thousands of academics. So what they find out is, rather than looking at imposter syndrome as an experience that we try to be avoided, we should really look at it from a formative part of career learning and development that helps us to shape how ourselves can develop our professional identity, right? And these are the three kind of common incidents of imposter syndrome on how we feel ourselves as academia. I think I touched on most of these, but one thing I haven't touched on, I think, is the comparison ways and among colleagues. I'm not quite sure if anyone experienced this as well. I sometimes will compare myself with my colleagues, especially the ones who are better than me. So I'm thinking, oh my God, someone got this award, I haven't, or someone got, a 3 publication, I got only 1, or someone have got, this and that, but I haven't. So then I start to have a lot of to-do list or to accomplish list that I try to tackle each year, right? This kind of feelings can motivate me, but sometimes may make me feel like the star is too high to reach, right? And then now slowly I learned that most of the time I'm comparing myself to someone who is much higher than me in terms of position and experience. So now I tend to compare myself with someone who has a similar experience and also position as me. But not only that, I tend to have a few role models that I follow. They are much, much higher than me. It's very difficult to catch up with them. But rather than comparing myself with them at their current career stage as a professor, I compare myself with them when they were an early career researcher at my stage. And as long as I'm kind of equivalent with what their achievements are at their career, at their stage of early career researcher, I'm happy. So I don't want to be too harsh on myself, try to match myself with someone who is already a professor, but also setting the standard that at my career stage, I am actually doing quite well, who was actually quite world-renowned when he was an early career researcher. And also something that's very specific to academics is actually about publications as well. Okay, so I talk a lot about it. Now let's move on to the coping approaches and share some of my, my own, approaches of how I cope it. I think in general, there are 4 different ways. One is a bit better, active coping, and the other one is avoidant coping. So for the active coping, I think Sharon and Tony both mentioned, seeking support, talking to people, and also ask for advice and suggestions. And I also agree with Tony that we do need to find someone we truly trust, because sometimes we feel really risky to share our weakness, especially at workplace, especially when you are trying to get a promotion. You don't want other people to know your weakness. So it really needs to be someone you truly trust, or even outside your career circle, that you can find someone that can really share some of your doubts. And also find ways of validating your success. So I will show one technique that Sharon mentioned, list your achievements. That's actually something that I constantly do and update. And also positive affirmation and self-talk, or even keeping a diary of your doubts will be helpful. So I use both. Positive talks to myself, and also the negative ones, I also write it down and tell myself the reasons why I shouldn't be thinking like this. So I will come back to read my diary later on. And sometimes people tend to avoid it by, for example, have a drink or two. That doesn't harm, but don't do too much of that as well, because from research, it's actually dysfunctional and harmful. But having 1 or 2 drinks, doesn't matter, and it definitely will help you to cope with the stress at work as well. And also working harder without addressing imposter syndrome could be also harmful, because we should always address how we feel and make sure that we feel confident and comfortable to move on, and be kind to ourselves and be serious to ourselves, like what Tony said. All right, so a couple of approaches from me. One is making small, achievable, and actionable goals, and write down my achievements, because in academia is, as I said before, is super competitive, very demanding, and it's sometimes very harsh as well, because I constantly face criticism from editors, from reviewers, even from my own supervisors, and also lots of rejections. And this year in total, I think I received 6 rejections already from my paper. So I need to have a strong mindset to deal with all these negative comments, and also telling myself I'm still doing really well, because these are my achievements, including the working papers. I put it down, so I know I have a pipeline of papers moving forward. So as long as things are rolling out, I'm actually okay, right? And so having this one really helped me to understand my own achievements and where I am and where I'm heading to in the future. So to clear my self-doubt. And also, there are some other approaches, but one I think is really important, and that Sharon, I think Tony also mentioned, is what is the value of your work? Because sometimes we tend to look at our KPIs, or this hard data to convince ourselves we are good. But instead of doing that, we should think about, what does success mean to me? What I'm doing? What is the value and mission or purpose of my work? If I don't have a kind of award or publications this year, I'm still, quite happy with what I'm doing, because I have a clear purpose and clear mission of what I'm doing. And for example, linking what my research to some of the practical issues we are facing, the grand challenges of climate change, for example. And also I mentioned not try to reach the star, but benchmark myself and yourself as well with someone from similar levels. And one example is, by the way, it took more than a year to come up with this map. And in the beginning, I have no idea, what is my identity. I'm just working on, different pieces and everything. And I get really confused, where I am heading in my career. And then slowly I come up with a map of, to link everything I do. Teaching, I teach more than 1,000 students a year on 5 different courses of so many different disciplines, and doing research on, international business strategy, a little bit of leadership and this, that. So what I'm doing, what is my mission? And then I decided, or I got determined that my mission of my teaching, my research, and also service as well is helping organizations become more competitive in facing their current and future challenges and both their domestic and international markets. And very briefly, some other approaches like what the other speakers also mentioned, fake it until you make it approach. And I know it's not a good approach. Probably, if we want to convince ourselves long term, we shouldn't rely on this. But for job interview, this one works. Plus some rehearsals as well. So for job interviews, for promotions, for this kind of thing, you got to deliver it in order to, have it. So I think for short term, do practice and rehearse, and then put yourself in this confidence zone in order to tackle some of the short-term challenges you are facing. And also looking into some of the positive comments as well as criticism. Most of the time when I receive reviewers' comment, I need to have a coffee or wait for a couple of days before I open the email, because I know there will be tons of criticism. But usually there's a very short paragraph of how good my paper is that I will ignore. But it's really important to also recognize the positive comments, and in order to tackle some of these moments better. All right, and don't undersell your achievements, especially for women. That's what I heard over and over again, that women tend to undersell themselves in promotions and also in job interviews. Learn from your competitors, apart from making comparisons. Look at why they are so good, and maybe that's because you guys have similar interests, and I think about how you can actually bridge some of your interests together and work together as a team. And ask for help. Be kind to yourself. I know some of the the ceiling. There's actually no limit, so there's always something that we are trying to achieve much higher, but really be kind to yourself, not too harsh with a lot of higher goals. Rather than that, looking at some of the realistic and achievable ones and do it step by step. And the last couple of things I want to mention before taking some questions is this, coping responses is helpful, but only probably for short term. And it's very common for imposter thoughts to come back. But we should always be, tackling it. Then it's completely common if you feel this, over and over again. Last thing, very last one is just want to re-emphasize that if you do feel, self-doubt, it might because you are trying to achieve something higher, right? And so, but often when we are trying to achieve something or on the road of pursuing happiness, we should always pause and also think about what are the things we already have and just be happy on the roadmap to pursue more happiness. So yeah, thank you so much for your time, and we're happy to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Lili. Your strategic graph of your mission and identity is certainly something I would take away. I hope that I'll start enjoying my own strategic goals along with my identity from tonight, and hopefully my drawings will be as good as yours. Thank you very much, Lili. Okay, we have already receiving a few questions along chat box, as you can see. So without further ado, I would like to ask the first question from the list. So the first question is from Isabella. So we have been mentioning the phrase fake it till make it several times by all of our speakers. So her question is how to sustain the mindset improvement if we don't try to use the fake it until make it approach. So comments from all the speakers are welcomed. Yes, Cheryl.
Well, I'll start, and then perhaps the others can join in. Look, I think we all have agreed that the fake it till you make it mindset is not necessarily the only approach to take, but it certainly has a contribution to make. I really like Lili's approach there, where it's actually about clarity of your vision and what you're trying to achieve. That's the sort of polar experience that you have when you're very clear about what it is that you're trying to achieve. You know, I just feel that that's a much better approach than the fake it till you make it, because, you know, the fake it till you make it approach can actually trigger even more of that imposter syndrome. So we need to be very careful that by pretending to be something that we really feel we're not, are we almost compounding that sense of imposter syndrome and the impacts of that on ourselves. So you know, I think both the two phrases, imposter syndrome and fake it till you make it, have really become the sort of social media like representation of what is a much more complex problem. So I think we just need to be careful about any sort of adoption of that approach.
So would you say it would still be useful for a specific scenario, say a job interview, or for just a short term, or you would definitely not recommend it?
I think rather than thinking it as I'm going to fake it till I make it, I'm going to deliberately consider how I put myself forward. I'm going to deliberately consider what my skills, strengths, and experience are, and I'm going to express them in a way that is a positive representation. And as Tony said, I'm going to practice how I do that so that I put that forward in the best way. Now, if you call that faking it till you make it, okay, that's fine. But I don't actually think it is faking it if you really are deliberate and considered about describing yourself, even the self that you want to be. You know, I want this opportunity because I feel that I can use the skills that I've got in this particular area to learn more, do more, affect more, impact more. You can project yourself into the future, and I don't think that is faking it if you truly are committed to it and believe in the way you're putting that forward.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. That's quite insightful. Tony, would you have any input on that? You probably want to unmute yourself.
Often people don't want to unmute me, but sorry, apologies for that. I agree with everything Cheryl said there, but just picking up on, I mean, I agree. I don't like the fake it till you make it But having said that, there is an element of cosmetic behaviour that's not all bad, and this is not disagreeing with Cheryl's commentary at all. We've all got our favourite clothing, we've all got our favourite shirts and colours that we like to wear for meetings or important meetings or interviews and what have you. So, but that is a bit cosmetic. But if it helps us feel a bit better about ourselves at the time, then do it. Absolutely, I do it. We all do it. But what I just would add to Cheryl's comments by going back to my concept about mentoring. One of the things, and I've got a mentor in my life now that I've got probably two, in fact, that one's a personal friend and one's a paid professional. But it's worthwhile knowing that you can actually tap into mentors in different ways. I mean, you can have a face-to-face meeting, you can have a phone call, you can have a quick text. So I use my mentors in different ways. And if I want something urgently, if I'm feeling a bit yucky or feeling doubtful about a conversation I want to have in an hour's time, I might send one of them just a quick text and say, listen, just, I'm not giving you all the detail here, but, what would you do in this situation? Or so all I'm saying is, in the wonderful world we're in today, you've got multiple ways of tapping into that mentoring process. It doesn't have to be a structured, formal, we must meet once a month, or, I mean, it can be that, but it doesn't have to be as rigid as that. And so we can get short-term fixes from other people that are much higher quality than the whole fake it till you make it thing. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you, Tony. Lili, would you like to add some last comments on that?
Yes, please.
Question?
I look at it as when a person is good herself or himself already, but might be slightly, not so good as one perspective. For example, myself, I'm not. I tend to undersell myself at most of the occasions. So that's something that I need to actually practice a lot. So I use this fake it until you make it approach when I had my first, when I had the interview that actually landed my first job. When I was asked to present within 5 minutes to answer 3 major challenges. So what I did is, I'm not a confident presenter, especially within 5 minutes to answer 3 really challenging questions. But I have to deliver the very best of myself to be as confident as I can. And what I did is what Tony recommended, rehearsed, don't know how many times, right? But when I was in the interview, I didn't look at the time, but after I finished the presentation, the chair of the recruitment team said, right on time, didn't go over even 1 second. And I got a job. So I think this is really about self-confidence. Is actually we tend to underestimate of our strengths, or if you notice that you have these tendencies, then you have to really convince yourself and then kind of fake, but that actually means putting yourself to an uncomfortable zone, but present the best of yourself. So that's my final add on this. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So essentially, from all of the speakers, we know that it's not that faking it that's important, is the positive internal self-encouragement and internal self-confidence in achieving the destination that you are designated to. That is what is important. So thank you very much for all the speakers' opinions towards that question. And now we come to the second question for Tony from Madison. So how do you know when to be political or strategic in your responses, and when to be honest when having difficult or important conversation with people? In her experience, that she felt that most exposed because she's doubting her approach or judgment when commenting or giving other people her opinion.
So I think, and I touched on this in terms of just generally contributing to meetings, but again, it applies when giving someone else feedback. I think, so there's 4 parts to my answer. One is to ask permission. and people probably won't say no, but they can. But once they've said yes, then you're entitled to give them meaningful and honest feedback. So asking permission is a very important thing to do. Second thing is don't bombard them. There are some situations. I mean, I've always said this in my work. I have to figure out people's threshold of pain. How hard do they want to go? Some people want to play sport for Australia. Some people want to just, go for a run around the block and survive, like me. So it's how hard do they want to go, and that's a guesstimate step sometimes. But you might just pick off. You might think there are 4 areas that they really need to improve. You might just go with 2 in the first instance. Okay. The third thing is language is important, and what I mean by that is I actually witnessed this. Was someone in a senior leadership role recently. I said to the CEO afterwards that this person was fantastic at giving feedback because they were making very strong suggestions, but they said they used language like to their colleagues, you might want to consider, you might want to think about. Really, he was saying you've got to do this, right? But he was languaging it in a way that it was able for them to think about it and feel like they could arrive at that decision themselves. So language can make a big difference. And the last one, and I only heard this recently. I actually was at a leadership workshop myself as an attendee, and I heard this and I thought this is really cool, where you actually say, look, the reason I'm sharing this with you is because you might, and it's as long as, because what that does is it means it's not personal between you and I. This is about, I'm sharing this because I think you might find this helpful when you're talking to members of your team. I'm making it up, right? But that takes the personality, out of play to a reasonable degree. Now, by the way, does everyone in the world want really, really honest feedback? No, they don't. But you go about it in a decent and caring way, and you have the right to do it. And if they don't want it, then you probably don't want them in your team, to be blunt.
Can I just add there, Tony? I think one of the things about feedback and those sort of phrases that you've used is you really need to invite feedback in, or be invited to provide feedback. I think probably that uncomfortableness comes when you weren't necessarily expecting feedback and it was delivered at you rather than with you or for you. So if you genuinely want feedback, then I think inviting someone to give that feedback for you almost enables them to have that conversation. And even if you as Tony gave the examples before, can you give me 2 good things I did well and 2 that I can improve on? You've invited that. And so if you're the person who's giving feedback, be conscious that you're just not leaping in and giving it, uninvited, so to speak. Using phrases like, I'd be happy to give you some feedback on your presentation if you were interested from an audience perspective, and let them invite you in to give that feedback, because that immediately takes some of the uncomfortableness out of a conversation like that.
Thank you, Cheryl. Do you have any inputs, Lili?
I'm good, sorry.
Okay, cool. I think from Cheryl and Tony's points of view to the question in regards to giving comments, I think it's really important to be strategic and to be respectful. Because I think from both of the speakers' comments, that reminds me of the phrase that I've heard, listen to understand, not to respond. Because understanding is the first priority in any communication from my personal experience. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tony, because you are definitely the communication guru here. So finding yourself in a position that you will not totally understand what other people are saying and providing your feedback can be on the one hand impolite and on the other hand insulting the other people, because the other people may see that you are not really listening to what I'm asking. So that's the first thing I've learned from the speaker's comments. And the other thing is it can take a strategic approach, saying ask for permission first, and then ask specific questions, say 2 things I've done well, 2 things I need to improve, or from which group's perspective or from which group's interest that I'm asking this permission. Say, like Cheryl mentioned, yes, for the interest of the audience, I'm asking this. Could you give us any comments or feedback, etc.? Very, very constructive advice towards that question. Thank you very much, Tony and Cheryl. We have a question here for Lili from Ingray. So is imposter syndrome a natural human mood, or is it mainly shaped by the external environment?
For me, I think it's a psychological feeling that's internal to us, but shaped by what is happening in at work or in your life. Not only the challenges that we are facing, but also the success and awards that we thought we we shouldn't be receiving this. So I think it's the interaction of our feelings shaped by the external environment.
Thank you, Lili. Cheryl and Tony, do you have any inputs on that question?
I was thinking about that one when I saw it up on the screen, and I automatically revert back to caveman days and think, well, if we were still back in the caveman days, and not that I think they were sitting around the fire talking about imposter syndrome, but I wonder if there is something naturally human about wanting to do things better and to be better at what we do, if that is in some ways a pretty basic survival instinct. And perhaps that is part of that. And it is, I think, as Lili pointed out, it is more common in high achievers who continue to push themselves to achieve more and be at that higher level. So I again, I'm not a psychologist, and I'm sure there are lots of studies about whether indeed this is a natural phenomenon or if it's externally shaped. But I do tend to think that there is something within us that wants us as humans to drive forward and be better in order to survive and not make the same mistakes, but to actually learn from mistakes we've made in order to get better. So I think perhaps it is a little bit shaped like that. Yes, those external factors are certainly there in terms of us labeling it, naming it, blaming it for a lot of things as well. So certainly it's a combination of both, but I do tend to think that maybe it is something that actually does drive high performance.
Thank you, Cheryl. What about Tony? Do you have any input on that?
Just quickly, I mean, it's a tough one, right? Because we want achievers in our world. We want high performance. That's all a good thing. But I suppose if I just come from a very human perspective, Lili mentioned the word happiness, and it's such a great word. It's such a fantastic word. And there's 2 thoughts that come to mind. I've always said that it's very hard to love someone who doesn't love themselves. And so, if you apply that to happiness and regard and confidence, it's hard to have confidence in someone if they don't have confidence in themselves. So it's a bit of a catch-22. So, and I think that leads to the other very, very old adage, we've got to stop and smell the roses. It's all very well wanting to always get better and better, but we just got to smell the roses, and we're not good at doing that sometimes, and that's to our detriment.
I like the word smell the roses, Tony. Thank you very much. So I'm conscious of the time, and I believe that everybody has been having a long day here. So we are having one last question. So, and it looks like this lovely person here needs some help. So she has been experiencing some if I may say, the self-confidence issues. So she was very self-confident previously because people worked with her, gave positive feedback. However, one manager kept telling her everything that she's done was a crap. Sorry to hear that. And then said that she thought she was not as good as what she claimed herself to be. And over time, she started to doubt herself deeply and still not fully regain the confidence that yet. Speakers, do you have any solutions to help our lovely audience in this situation?
Can I share something quickly? I'm aware of the time because probably I experienced this more in my career as well, of receiving negative feedback. And I heard something similar, like what you did is not good. And for the first time when I received it, yes, I think I doubt myself for quite a long time, but slowly I recognize my own value by actually clearly understand what are the criteria in my performance and match myself to that. And then I realized actually achieved all the required performance within my work and above that. So I think it depends on whether you can have a candid conversation with the person who criticized you. If you can talk about if I could have more positive feedback that will be helping me. So I did that one for person who is quite open, but for in the other instance, that person, I know if I talk about that with him, it won't work. So I did the other way, is benchmark myself across the performance standard that's required. And then I performed above and beyond on each of these criteria and present it in front of that person. So he said, you know what, I'm supporting you to go above a level or something, So I think that's are two ways that I will recommend, depending on who the person you are speaking to, whether he or she is willing to listen to you, or you go to the other way of, really provide evidence of, your performance. Thank you.
Tony, I might let you tackle this one.
Thanks, Cheryl. Gee. Look, quick comment. I think not all, I mean, people say feedback's a gift. Not all feedback is a gift. Not all feedback is valid. And it depends on motive. So one of the things, and I know I've been repetitive about mentors tonight, but one of the things that I want in mentors to help me or anyone is they have to have no ulterior motive. They have nothing, there's no skin in the game in my success or failure, whichever way they go. And that way they can give me pure feedback. So obviously we don't know the circumstance behind that person's, that asked the question, but, it might be that the person giving the feedback has got ulterior motives. It might be they're driven by their own insecurities. There's all sorts of issues at play. So you don't have to take all feedback on board. I think you've got to entertain it. You've got to hear it, but you might have to question, okay, where is this person coming from? And is it truly authentic? It isn't always, sadly.
Yes, I'd agree with that. I think you've got to look at why that person has made that comment, which seems to be, based on what you've said, different to the rest of the feedback that you've received from colleagues. So it would probably lead me, like Tony, to believe that maybe, for some other reason, they've either they feel threatened, or they've got a confidence problem, or for some other reason, they've decided that, maybe they need to take you down a peg or two. I think you have to question, how important is that feedback to you? There are many voices, and is that the most important voice in the room to you, or is it just a voice that seems to be different? And maybe put it in perspective in that way. But yeah, I agree with Tony. I think sometimes we need to understand that there's other reasons why people might be giving feedback, and try to put some context around it. And, at the end of the day, if it is that uninvited feedback, try not to dwell on it, take something out of it, which is not everybody's going to love what we do all the time. And sometimes in Lili's case, it drove her to perform better. What can you pick out of that negative feedback that perhaps you can use in a positive way, but also put it in the context of why they're giving that feedback? And it could be for unexplained or unusual reasons.
Can I just very quickly add to that? One of the tactics to find out whether there's an ulterior motive or not is to ask them to be specific. So if someone says, Tony, that was crap, you go, okay, why was it crap? How was it crap? And if they can't answer that, oh, it was just all bad, Tony, that presentation was just terrible. If they're being general, then that's not probably really authentic feedback. So that's one thing. And I also just want to pick up on Cheryl's comment. It's been the biggest life lesson for me. It's been the hardest life lesson for me. You can't please everyone. You just can't. I spent most of my life wanting to be liked by everybody. It's absolutely impossible. So, you know, you've got to keep that perspective as well. I'll shush now.
Well said, everyone. I believe that in your situation, it's really important to understand the motive behind the person. And as Cheryl mentioned out, well, comparing with other people's feedback, it was just the one person saying that, and without specific comments, like Tony mentioned. I think probably just trying to get the voices out of your head. I think that will be a better approach. And in some cases, like in Lili's example, it actually helped her to excel and to achieve better performances. But it really depends on how you would see yourself, because other people's voices, either constructive or destructive, they're external voices. I think personally, the confidence is from within, not from the outside. So thank you very much for the speakers' presentation and sharing the stories, insights, answering all the questions. Those are really good questions to ask. I believe that's not only unique to the audience and herself. And then I'm conscious of the time over here, even though we're not really overdue for time. So I would like to share with you guys that we are having some upcoming events in July from the other chapter. So if everyone can see my screen, so we have a upcoming events in Adelaide chapter on July the 6th. That was an in-person event. If anyone from DC events are actually in Adelaide, feel free to reach out to Adelaide chapter, or if you're interested, just to apply. And there is another upcoming event early in July as well from our Melbourne chapter, navigating the legal challenges arising from COVID-19 events. So further details will be confirmed and emailed to our members via email. And then feel free to join us on LinkedIn and Facebook, and reach out to us on WeChat and Twitter as well. Our website is acypi.org.au. Feel free to join our committee, or if you're interested in to becoming a member of Brisbane chapter, feel free to reach out myself. So in summary, it was a lovely event to talking about imposter syndrome. It may not be viewed as a mental illness for many of us, and in fact, it may not be. It's maybe just something from our human nature, or just internal fears when we're facing, or the discomfort driven by the external circumstances. In summary, what we are seeing from today is the self-confidence is actually sometimes not really driven by the voices from the others. It's always come from within. And then when seeking opinions from the outside world, there are strategic approach, like Tony and Cheryl and Lili mentioned. And sometimes we don't really need to take all the things that are personal. Sometimes we need to get the external voices out of our mind and be confident as always and keep going. So thank you very much for everyone for attending the events. We'll be very welcoming to receiving your feedback, and looking forward to see you in our upcoming events in Brisbane chapter and all the other chapters in Australia and China. We hope you have a lovely evening and take care. Wish you well.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you very much, Tony, Cheryl, and Lili. It was lovely having you.